Maid crossed her boss over the will, never imagining his true identity. Rebecca Johnson slammed the office door hard enough to make the pictures on the wall shake. Her 20 years of dedicated service in that Upper East Side mansion in New York City seemed worthless after what she'd just discovered in her employer's will. That's when she heard Richard Blackwell's hoarse voice on the other side of the door, telling her to come in. The 52-year-old businessman sat behind the mahogany desk, holding the very document that had turned her life upside down. "I need to talk to you about this will," Rebecca said, unable to hide the hurt in her voice. "Sit down, Rebecca," Richard replied, but she remained standing, arms crossed. 20 years, Mr. Blackwell. 20 years I've taken care of this house as if it were my own. I cleaned, I cooked, I looked after you when you were sick, and now I find out you're leaving everything to a complete stranger." Richard lowered his eyes to the document in his hands. Rebecca noticed something different in his expression, a sadness she'd never seen before, not even in the worst moments after losing his wife 10 years ago. "How did you find out about the will?" he asked, avoiding her gaze. "The housekeeper Martha told me. She saw when the lawyer brought the papers yesterday," Rebecca answered. "Sir, I don't want your money, but I need to understand. Who is this Olivia Parker, who's set to inherit everything you've built?" The name made Richard look up sharply, as if he'd been shocked. His hands trembled slightly as he set the will down on the desk. "Olivia," he whispered. "It's a very old story, Rebecca, one I thought I'd buried long ago." "Then tell me," she insisted. "After everything we've been through, after I've cared for you like family, I think I deserve an explanation." Richard stood slowly and walked to the window overlooking the garden. Rebecca could see his reflection in the glass, and for the first time in 20 years, she saw tears in her employer's eyes. "Olivia saved my life a long time ago," he began, still facing away. "When I was just a young businessman trying to build my first company, I had a terrible accident. She was a nurse at the hospital where I was treated." Rebecca felt a tightness in her chest. All these years, she'd never heard Richard speak of any woman other than his late wife, Catherine. "But you were married to Mrs. Catherine," she said, confused. "Not at the time," Richard answered, turning to face her. "Olivia and we fell in love during my recovery. It was intense but brief. She disappeared overnight, leaving only a letter saying she couldn't see me anymore." Rebecca's curiosity was turning into something more complicated. There was a pain in Richard's voice she recognized, the same pain she felt when she thought of her own mother, who had left when she was just a child. "Then why do you want to leave everything to her now?" Richard returned to the desk and opened a hidden drawer Rebecca hadn't even known existed. From inside, he pulled out an old, yellowed photograph. "Because I never stopped looking for her," he said, handing the photo to Rebecca. When Rebecca looked at the image, her world stopped. The photo showed a younger Richard beside a woman with brown hair and green eyes, wearing a nurse's uniform. But it wasn't just any woman. It was a woman who bore an unsettling resemblance to— "My God!" Rebecca whispered, nearly dropping the photo. "What's wrong?" Richard asked, noticing the sudden pallor in her face. Rebecca couldn't speak. The woman in the photo had the same green eyes she saw in the mirror every day, the same curve of the face, the same shape of the nose. It was as if she were looking at an older version of herself. "Dr. Richard," she said in a shaky voice, "what was this Olivia's full last name?" "Olivia Parker Smith," he replied. "Why?" The last name of Rebecca's mother was exactly that, Smith, and her mother was named Olivia. The pieces of a puzzle she didn't even know existed began to form in her mind. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. "I need to sit down," said Rebecca, collapsing into the leather armchair. "Rebecca, are you all right?" asked Richard, concerned. My mother was named Olivia Parker Smith," she managed to say, still staring at the photo. "She abandoned me when I was 5, left me with my grandmother and disappeared." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard stood motionless, like a statue, processing what he had just heard. "When were you born, Rebecca?" he asked in a near whisper. "March 15th, 1992, she answered automatically. Richard did quick mental calculations. Olivia had disappeared in July of 1991. If she had been pregnant when she left... It can't be, he murmured, but his voice carried not disbelief but a mix of hope and terror. Doctor, were you with my mother in 1991? Rebecca asked, though she already knew the answer from the look on his face. Yes, Richard replied, stepping closer. We were together from January to July that year. Olivia disappeared in July right after... He stopped speaking, but Rebecca finished the sentence in her mind. Right after finding out she was pregnant. Let me show you more photos, Richard said, returning to the secret drawer. He pulled out a yellowed envelope and, with trembling hands, spread several photographs across the table. Rebecca moved closer and saw images of her mother at different moments, smiling in a park, embracing Richard in front of a restaurant, wearing a dress Rebecca faintly remembered seeing in her grandmother's closet. This one was taken just days before she disappeared, Richard said, pointing to a photo where Olivia had a discreet hand resting on her stomach. Rebecca felt her legs weaken. If this were true, if she really was Richard's daughter, it meant she had spent 20 years working for her own father without knowing. "Doctor, this can't be happening," she said, beginning to cry. "Martha," Richard called out. "Get Martha in here, please." Within minutes, Martha Wilson appeared at the door. The 65-year-old housekeeper had been in the house longer than anyone, hired by Richard's mother decades ago. "Mrs. Wilson," Richard said, trying to keep his voice steady, "do you remember when Rebecca first came here to work?" Martha looked from Richard to Rebecca, noticing the tears and the tension in the room. "Of course I remember," she replied. "Rebecca showed up here looking for work 20 years ago, said her grandmother had just passed and she needed a job urgently." "Do you remember anything else about her family?" Richard pressed. Martha hesitated, as if deciding whether to share something. "Doctor, there's something I never told anyone," she finally said. "When Rebecca first arrived, she reminded me so much of someone. I thought it was just my imagination, but..." "Who did I remind you of?" Rebecca asked. "A young woman the doctor used to bring around a long time ago, a very pretty nurse with green eyes. They had the same way of smiling, the same habit of tilting their heads when deep in thought." Richard and Rebecca exchanged glances. Martha's confirmation made the impossible seem increasingly possible. "Mrs. Wilson," Richard said, "why did you never say anything?" "Because I thought it would be out of place," she replied. "How could I have imagined that? But now that you're talking about it..." Martha stopped speaking and hurried to an old cabinet in the corner of the office. From inside, she pulled out a dusty box. "I found these things in the guest room years ago, after the young woman disappeared," she said, handing the box to Richard. "You were so depressed at the time that I didn't want to trouble you. I kept them thinking she might come back for them one day." Richard opened the box with trembling hands. Inside were a few pieces of clothing, a simple ring, and at the bottom, a sealed envelope with the name Richard, written in delicate handwriting. "A letter," he murmured. "She left a letter." Rebecca stepped closer, her heart racing. Richard carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the yellowed sheet of paper. "May I read it?" Rebecca asked. Richard nodded, passing her the letter. With a shaky voice, Rebecca began reading aloud. "My dearest Richard, by the time you read this letter, I will already be gone. I know you won't understand, and I beg your forgiveness for not having the courage to tell you in person. I am carrying your child, and this baby deserves a father who can give them everything I never could. You have a bright future ahead. You'll marry a woman of your social standing and build a beautiful family. I can't stand in the way of your dreams. Our daughter or son will grow up far away but surrounded by love. If fate allows it, perhaps we'll meet again one day. Keep me in your heart as I will keep you in mine forever. With eternal love, Olivia." The silence after the reading was absolute. Rebecca let the letter fall into her lap, tears streaming down her face. Richard stood by the window, his shoulders trembling. "She was pregnant," he whispered. "Olivia was pregnant and never told me." "What if that child was me?" Rebecca asked, though it sounded more like a statement. Martha stepped forward and took Rebecca's hand gently. "Sweetheart, Did you never know who your father was? She asked. My grandmother always said my mother never told her. She only said he was a good man, but they couldn't be together, Rebecca replied. When my mother left me with her, she said it was for my own good, that one day I'd understand. Richard turned, his face marked by emotion. Rebecca, we need to do a DNA test, he said. I have to be sure. And if it's true? She asked. What if I really am your daughter? How do we handle that? I don't know, Richard admitted, but I know I can't spend the rest of my life without knowing the truth. In the days that followed, the tension in the mansion was palpable. Richard had scheduled the tests for the following week, but the wait was agonizing for both of them. Rebecca continued working, but now every interaction with Richard carried a different weight. During Thursday's dinner, Richard could no longer pretend everything was normal. Rebecca, sit here with me, he said, gesturing to the chair beside his at the dining table. Doctor, that's not my place, she replied, maintaining the protocol she'd followed for 20 years. If you're my daughter, your place is by my side, he said softly. Rebecca hesitated but finally sat down. The dining table had never felt so large, and yet so intimate. Tell me about your childhood, Richard asked. There isn't much to tell, Rebecca answered. My grandmother did the best she could, but we were poor. She worked as a seamstress, and I helped from a young age. I studied through high school, but then I had to work to help with expenses. Did you want to keep studying? He asked. I always dreamed of going to college, she admitted. I wanted to study business, maybe open my own shop one day. Richard watched her closely. There was an intelligence in her eyes he'd noticed over the years, but he'd never paid enough attention to see the potential right in front of him. And boyfriends, you never married? He asked, trying to learn more about the life of the woman who could be his daughter. I had a few boyfriends, but nothing serious, Rebecca replied. I think I was always afraid of getting attached and being abandoned again, like my mother did. The honesty in her voice struck Richard deeply. If she really was his daughter, she'd grown up with emotional wounds that could have been avoided if he'd known the truth. Rebecca, if the test confirms you're my daughter, I want you to know I would never have willingly abandoned you, he said, taking her hand. Olivia made that decision alone, without giving me a choice. I know, Rebecca answered. From the letter, you can tell she thought she was doing what was best for everyone. But it wasn't best, Richard said firmly. You should have grown up here, as my daughter, with every opportunity I could have given you. The following Friday, the results came in. Richard called Rebecca into his office, where Martha was also present. The sealed envelope lay on the desk like a verdict that would change all their lives. Should I open it? Richard asked. Let's open it together, Rebecca replied. They tore the envelope simultaneously and unfolded the paper. The first line said it all. Probability of paternity, 99.98%. Rebecca dropped the paper and covered her face with her hands. 20 years working for her own father. 20 years of yes sir and no sir to the man who should have been her family. Richard stood slowly and walked to her. For the first time in 2 decades, he embraced her not as an employer, but as a father. My daughter, he whispered, his voice breaking. My daughter was here all along. Martha wept quietly in the corner, moved by the reunion. Now I have to change everything, Richard said, stepping back to look at Rebecca. The will, your status in this house, your life. Doctor. Dad, Rebecca said, testing the word for the first time. I don't want anything to change too drastically. This house has always been my home, and you've always been like a father to me, even before we knew the truth. But you can't keep working here as staff, Richard protested. You're my heir, my daughter. I can be your daughter and still help take care of the house, she replied with a smile. But maybe now I can also study, fulfill that college dream. Richard smiled, recognizing the determination and humility he'd always admired in her. We'll do better than that, he said. You'll study business and learn to manage the family affairs. One day, all of this will be yours anyway. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now, back to the story. But the peace didn't last long. The following Monday, Victoria Blackwell, Richard's niece and his late brother's daughter, showed up at the mansion unannounced. Victoria had always believed she'd be the sole heir, especially since Richard had no known children. "Uncle Richard, we need to talk," Victoria said, barging into the office without knocking. Rebecca was there, organizing some documents Richard had asked her to review. Victoria glared at her with disdain. "In private," she added, a hint of arrogance in her voice. "Rebecca can stay," said Richard calmly. "Actually, there's something you need to know about her." "What does a maid have to do with family matters?" asked Victoria, irritated. "Rebecca isn't a maid anymore," Richard replied. "She's my daughter." The silence that followed was sharp. Victoria stood frozen for a few seconds, processing the information. "Is this a joke?" she finally asked. "We just got the DNA test confirmation," Richard said, showing her the results. Victoria quickly scanned the document, her expression shifting from disbelief to anger. "This is impossible," she said. "How can a maid suddenly turn out to be your daughter?" "Victoria, watch your words," Richard warned. "No, Uncle. This is all very convenient, don't you think?" Victoria eyed Rebecca with suspicion. "She's worked here for 20 years, knows everything about the family, about your emotional weaknesses. She must have planned this to get the inheritance." "Victoria!" Richard exclaimed, standing up. "Let it go, Dad," Rebecca said calmly. It was the first time she had called Richard Dad in front of someone else. "Victoria, I understand your shock. I'm still processing it myself." "Don't give me that fake humility," Victoria snapped. "You fooled my uncle, but you won't fool me. I'll dig into every detail of this story." "Be my guest," Rebecca replied, staying composed. "The truth has nothing to fear." Victoria stormed out, slamming the door and leaving a tense atmosphere in the office. "I'm sorry about that," Richard said to Rebecca. "She has a right to be surprised," Rebecca replied. "For years she believed she'd be the only heir. Now suddenly there's a daughter she never knew existed." "You're very understanding," Richard observed. "But I'm afraid Victoria won't accept this easily." And Richard was right. Over the following weeks, Victoria hired investigators to comb through Rebecca's life, determined to find any inconsistency in the story. Meanwhile, Rebecca began adjusting to her new reality. Richard insisted she move into one of the mansion's main bedrooms, but she chose to stay in the room that had always been hers, saying she felt more comfortable there. "Dad, can I ask you something?" Rebecca said one Saturday afternoon as they had coffee in the garden. "Of course, ask me anything," Richard replied. "Why did you never remarry after Catherine passed?" she asked. Richard was thoughtful for a moment. "I think part of me was still searching for Olivia," he admitted. "Catherine was a wonderful wife, and I loved her dearly. But Olivia was my first true love. Even after I married, I always wondered what might have been if she hadn't disappeared." "And now you know," Rebecca said softly. "Now I know she was protecting our daughter," he replied, looking at Rebecca affectionately. "She thought she was doing what was best for you." "Maybe she was," Rebecca reflected. "If I'd grown up wealthy, maybe I wouldn't have learned the same humility, the same appreciation for hard work. Or maybe you would have become an even more wonderful person with all the opportunities you deserved," Richard countered. During one of Victoria's investigations, something unexpected happened. The detective she'd hired uncovered information about Olivia that even Richard didn't know. "Uncle, I need to show you something," Victoria said, appearing in the office one Tuesday afternoon. This time her demeanor was different, no longer arrogant but genuinely concerned. "What is it?" Richard asked. "My investigator found information about Olivia Parker Smith," Victoria said, placing a folder on the table. Rebecca, who was present, felt a tightness in her chest. "What kind of information?" asked Richard. "About what happened to her after she left New York City," replied Victoria. She opened the folder and took out some documents. Olivia moved to the countryside to a town called Westchester. There she married a man named Daniel Smith and had other children. Rebecca's world seemed to spin. She had siblings she never knew existed. "How many children?" she asked in a weak voice. "Two," replied Victoria, checking the documents. "A boy and a girl. The boy is named Ryan, he's 18. The girl is named Emma, She's 15. Richard took the documents and examined them carefully. Where are they now? He asked. Olivia passed away 3 years ago from cancer, said Victoria, her voice softening. Daniel Smith has been raising the children alone. They live in a modest house in Westchester and are struggling financially. Rebecca began to cry. Her mother was gone and she hadn't even known. More than that, she had siblings who grew up knowing the mother she lost at 5. Rebecca, said Richard, stepping closer to her, I know this is hard, but perhaps it's a chance to meet your siblings. They don't even know I exist, said Rebecca through tears. According to the documents, said Victoria, Olivia told her husband about you. Daniel Smith knows she had a daughter before marrying him. We need to go there, Richard decided. We need to meet Olivia's family. Can I come with you? Asked Victoria, surprising everyone. Why? Asked Rebecca. Because maybe I misjudged you, Victoria admitted. Seeing this information, I realize your story is true, and if you really are my uncle's daughter, then you're family, and family supports each other. The following weekend, the 3 of them traveled to Westchester. Daniel Smith's house was modest but well kept. When they knocked, a man around 50 answered. Daniel Smith? Asked Richard. That's me, replied the man, eyeing the well-dressed visitors curiously. My name is Richard Blackwell. This is Rebecca Smith. We believe she is the daughter of Olivia Parker Smith. Daniel's face changed completely. He studied Rebecca carefully, his eyes filling with tears. Rebecca, he whispered. Olivia spoke of you often. She said she hoped to see you again one day. She talked about me, asked Rebecca, moved. Every day, replied Daniel. Please come in, Ryan, Emma, come here. 2 teenagers appeared in the living room. Ryan was tall and dark-haired, with features faintly reminiscent of Olivia. Emma looked more like Rebecca, with the same green eyes as their mother. Kids, said Daniel, his voice thick. This is Rebecca, your mother's eldest daughter. The silence was broken by Emma, who ran to hug Rebecca. Sister, she exclaimed. Mom always said you were real. Ryan approached more slowly, but eventually joined the embrace. Rebecca wept openly, finally feeling part of a complete family. Daniel explained that Olivia had always kept childhood photos of Rebecca, which her grandmother had sporadically sent before passing away. He showed an album filled with memories of Rebecca's childhood she never knew existed. Olivia wanted to come back for you, said Daniel, but she was afraid you wouldn't forgive her for leaving. I would have forgiven her, said Rebecca. I always did. During their conversation, it became clear the family was struggling. Daniel worked as a mechanic, but his wages barely covered the children's education. Daniel, said Richard, I'd like to help. Rebecca is my daughter, and if these are her siblings, they're my stepchildren too. That's not necessary, sir, Daniel replied with dignity. We've always managed. Dad, said Rebecca, can I speak with Daniel alone? Richard waved and left with Victoria and the young ones to the garden. Daniel, said Rebecca, I know you're proud and I respect that, but Emma and Ryan are my siblings. I want to be part of their lives. At least let me help with their studies. Daniel watched her for a long moment. Olivia used to say you had a big heart, he finally said. I see she was right. When they returned to New York City, there was a new dynamic in the family. Richard had decided to fund Ryan and Emma's education, and the siblings would spend alternating holidays and weekends at the mansion. Victoria, who had initially opposed the situation, ended up charmed by the young ones and became a close aunt. You know what, Rebecca, Victoria said one afternoon, I think you're going to be a wonderful addition to the family. Thank you, Victoria, Rebecca replied. I know it wasn't easy to accept all this. I have to admit, my fear wasn't of you. It was of being alone, Victoria confessed. I've always seen Uncle Richard as a father figure since I lost my dad so young. When I found out he had a daughter, I thought I'd lose that connection. You'll never lose that, Rebecca assured her. There's room for all of us in this family. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. A few months later, life had settled into a new routine. Rebecca had begun her business administration studies, attending night classes so she could keep helping with the family business during the day. Richard was teaching her about the companies, gradually preparing her for bigger responsibilities. During a meeting with investors, Rebecca impressed everyone with her sharp observations on an expansion proposal. "Where did you find such a competent assistant?" one investor asked Richard afterward. "This is my daughter, Rebecca," Richard replied proudly. "Soon she'll be my partner." The revelation caused murmurs among those present, but Richard didn't care. He was too proud to worry about others' opinions. "Dad," Rebecca said in the car on the way home, "are you sure you want to involve me so much in the business? People will say it's nepotism." "Let them talk," Richard answered. "You've earned your place here through skill, not just because you're my daughter. Actually, I want to discuss something with you." "What is it?" "I'm thinking of creating a foundation in Olivia's memory," he said. "A foundation to help women in difficult situations, single mothers who need support raising their children." Rebecca was moved by the idea. "I think it's a beautiful tribute," she said. "We could include job training programs too, so these women can gain financial independence." "I want you to run the foundation," Richard said. "It's work that aligns perfectly with your values and life experience." That evening during family dinner, which now included Martha as a special guest since she'd practically become a grandmother to everyone, Richard made an announcement. "I have a proposal for you all," he said, looking at Rebecca, Victoria, Ryan, and Emma. "How about we turn this house into a real family home?" "What do you mean?" Victoria asked. "I want Ryan and Emma to move here permanently," Richard explained. "They can study in New York City, have every opportunity they deserve. Daniel can move too if he wants. There's plenty of room in this mansion." Ryan and Emma exchanged excited glances. "Can I finish high school here and try for medical school?" Ryan asked. "Of course you can," Richard replied, "and Emma can attend the best school in the city." "But what about Daniel?" Rebecca asked. "He'd never accept charity." "It won't be charity," Richard said. "I need someone trustworthy to handle garage and car maintenance. Daniel has mechanical experience. It will be decent work with fair pay." The offer was presented to Daniel the following weekend. As expected, he hesitated. "I don't want you to pity us," he said. "Daniel," said Rebecca, "it's not pity, it's family. Olivia will always be the connection between us. Let us honor her memory by taking care of each other." After much discussion, Daniel agreed. The move happened the next month, and the mansion that for years had housed only Richard, Martha, and Rebecca suddenly came alive. Ryan adjusted quickly to his new school and proved to be a brilliant student. Emma, shy at first, soon made friends and excelled in art classes. Daniel took over the garage and turned out to be not just an excellent mechanic, but also a wise mentor for the younger ones. One afternoon, Rebecca found Martha organizing Richard's office. "Mrs. Martha," she said, "I want to ask you something that might sound strange." "Go ahead, dear," Martha replied. "You always knew, didn't you?" Rebecca asked. "You always suspected I was his daughter." Martha stopped what she was doing and turned to Rebecca. "Not exactly," she said after a moment, "but I always thought there was something special in how Dr. Blackwell cared for you. He was never close to the staff, but with you it was different." "Different how?" "He worried about your education, asked about your future plans. When you were sick, he'd grow anxious. I thought it was just kindness, but now I see it was paternal instinct." Rebecca smiled, remembering moments over the years that now made sense. "And how do you feel about all these changes?" she asked. "I feel blessed," Martha answered sincerely. "I've cared for this house for 40 years, seen it too empty. Now it's full of love and laughter, as it always should have been." That evening, Richard called Rebecca into his office for a private talk. "Daughter," he said, "there's something I've been thinking about and I want your opinion." "Go ahead, Dad." "I want to visit Olivia's grave," he said. "I want to say goodbye properly. Thank her for taking such good care of you." Rebecca felt a lump in her throat. "I'd like to see where she rests too," she said. "I never got to say goodbye." "We can go together," Richard proposed. "Bring flowers. Tell her about our reunited family." The following weekend, they all traveled to Westchester again, this time to visit the cemetery where Olivia was buried. Daniel led them to a simple but well-kept grave with a headstone that read, Olivia Parker Smith, beloved mother and wife. Richard placed a bouquet of white roses, Olivia's favorite, according to Daniel, while Rebecca left a letter she'd written the night before. What did you write? Ryan asked curiously. That I forgave her for leaving me, that I understood it was out of love, Rebecca answered, and that I found Dad, and we're a happy family now. Emma began to cry, and soon everyone was moved. Even Victoria, who had never met Olivia, was touched by the moment. You know what she'd say if she could see us now? Daniel said, breaking the silence. What? Richard asked. That all the suffering was worth it, because in the end, love won, Daniel replied with a sad smile. Back in New York City, life settled into its new rhythm. Rebecca graduated with honors in business administration and officially became Richard's partner in the company. The Olivia Foundation had grown into one of the city's most respected charities. Victoria married a lawyer she met at one of the foundation's events, and everyone attended the wedding as one united family. Ryan was accepted into Columbia University's medical school, fulfilling the dream he'd had since living in the countryside. Emma discovered a talent for music and began composing songs about family and forgiveness. Daniel, who initially felt out of place in the mansion, became a cornerstone of the family. His simple wisdom and life experience were often sought by everyone when they needed advice. Martha, at 70 years old, finally agreed to retire but continued living in the mansion as a family member. This house needs someone to tell the old stories, she said, laughing. One Sunday evening during one of the family dinners that had become a tradition, Richard raised a toast. I want to thank Olivia, he said, lifting his glass, for raising such a wonderful daughter and, through her, giving me the family I always wanted. To Olivia, everyone chorused. And to our crazy but loving family, added Victoria, making everyone laugh. Rebecca looked around the table at the faces of the people she loved. 20 years ago, she was just a maid, struggling to survive. Now she was a daughter, sister, godmother, partner, and director of a foundation that helped hundreds of women. Dad, she said, can I make a confession? Of course. All these years working here, I always felt at home. Now I understand why. It wasn't just a job, it was where I belonged all along. Richard smiled, his eyes glistening. And I always felt there was something special about you, Rebecca. Now I know it was my heart recognizing my daughter. Months later, the family received an unexpected surprise. A lawyer arrived at the mansion with an old envelope. This document was to be delivered to the Blackwell family when Rebecca Smith was officially recognized as Richard Blackwell's daughter, the lawyer explained. Who left this? Richard asked. Olivia Parker Smith, replied the lawyer. She left very specific instructions with my predecessor years ago. Everyone gathered in the study as Richard opened the envelope. Inside were a letter and some photos. Dear Richard and my beloved Rebecca, the letter began, if you're reading this, it means fate has finally brought you together. I always knew this day would come. Rebecca, my daughter, you were the love of my life, and leaving you was the hardest decision I ever made. But I knew Richard would give you everything I couldn't. Richard, thank you for giving our daughter the life she deserved. The photos with this letter are from every birthday of Rebecca's I could follow from afar, through a friend who lived in New York City. I never stopped loving you. Be happy, Olivia. The photos showed Olivia watching Rebecca from a distance over the years, at her high school graduation, the 18th birthday party Richard had thrown for her, and other important moments. She was always nearby, whispered Rebecca, touching one of the photos. She never truly left us, said Richard. She was just protecting us from afar. That night, Rebecca stayed up late, looking at the photos and rereading the letter. For the first time in her life, she felt completely at peace with her story. There were no more unanswered questions, no more unresolved hurts. The next day, she called the whole family together. I want to propose something, she said. How about we start an annual tradition? Every year, on the anniversary of Mom's passing, we can gather at the cemetery and then throw a big celebration here at home, honoring the family she helped create. I think that's a beautiful idea, said Emma. Olivia would be happy, agreed Daniel. Then it's settled, said Richard. It'll be our Olivia family day. End of story. And what did you think of this touching story about family, forgiveness, and second chances? Have you ever been in a situation where you discovered something important about your family that changed everything? Share your experience in the comments. Did you enjoy the story? Leave your like, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other heartwarming stories that will touch your heart.